Welcome to Work From Your Happy Place, the podcast that equips you with the tools, know-how, and motivation to live your dreams and find your happy place. Be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter for a recap of the week's guests and a preview of what's in store. To sign up, simply text the word Happy Place with no space to 33444. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce the host of Work From Your Happy Place, Belinda Ellsworth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Work From Your Happy Place, our artistic portion of our show. I'm so excited today. I have Ben Folds with me, and Ben Folds is widely regarded as one of the major music influencers of our generation. He's created an enormous body of genre-bending music that includes pop albums with Ben Folds 5, multiple solo albums, and numerous collaborative records. His last album was a blend of pop song and his Concerto for Piano and Orchestra that soared to #1 on both Billboard classical and classical crossover charts. For over a decade, he's performed with some of the world's greatest symphony orchestras and currently serves as the first ever artistic advisor to the National Symphony Orchestra at the Kennedy Center. It is my pleasure to welcome Ben to our show today.
Good to be here. Good to be here.
Thanks. Well, it's been really interesting for the last couple of weeks, in preparation of our show. I knew you were going to be on, I would say, to several of my friends, colleagues, just a variety of different people. Yeah, I'm having Ben Folds on the show. And it was interesting to get their response. It was a very distinct path that people knew you. Oh, Ben Folds 5. And then they would take off on that. And they really knew little else. Like that was what they really related to. And then I had people say, oh, he was the guy from the sing-off, right? And I was like, yeah, he did that too. And then it was, and even like I was talking to a real young guy, 22, and he goes, oh, he's the guy of Rockin' the Suburbs. And so I just found it really interesting that the people that relate to you relate to a very specific area or time in your career.
Yeah.
So
true. Yeah,
it is. So let's talk about what you're doing today. I know that you've been in Australia since the pandemic and you've been working on some new projects. So let's talk about who Ben Folds is today.
Who I am today. Well, I mean, looks like this behind me, and a couple stations for doing various things. Let's see. Well, I mean, at the moment, I'm working on a podcast, which is something you'd be familiar with. The podcast is on creativity, and the real challenge for me is that I've been doing a song per guest. So a guest will give me an idea for a song, or I will take something that they inadvertently said that might have been on pitches or something and create a song out of it for the. I figure if we're going to talk about creativity, we may as well walk the walk and actually create something. But the idea behind it is more of a broad sense of creativity, in everybody's lives. You can focus on it as an artist because that's what we do specifically. But nobody's business or life or happiness is complete without being creative. That's just people. So that's the podcast. And I'm writing songs. I sort of put an album on the back burner. I began at the lockdown thinking I wanted to do an album, and then I found I like to be useful, and I just found I was much more useful to do many, many other things at the time. So, I'll get to the album sometime.
Right. It's been amazing at how many people have done albums, written books. And today the statistic I heard is 1.1 million new entrepreneurial businesses have been launched during this pandemic. So I think people really sort of got in touch with their creative side and made choices to do something different.
Yeah. And it makes sense. What can I do with my time? And also what really makes me happy is probably what matters most, probably occurred to many people over the last year. And I'm pretty convinced that that creativity is there in the top 5 anyway for almost anybody, no matter what you do. It's what people do. It's how we survive.
Absolutely. So let's sort of fill in the gaps of this bio and tell people a little bit more about when did you first realize that music was going to be your thing? Like when did that become just kind of a known fact to you? And then when did it feel like a reality for you?
Yeah, I wasn't, I'm not really aware of a time in my life that I didn't think I was a musician. I'm not sure when I made the transition from being an embryo to a musician. I just don't know if that even occurred. When I was 2, I was listening to music all the time, and that's probably a dubious sounding, outrageous claim I made at the beginning of my book, which was that I listened to 8 hours of music a day, but that came from my mother. I knew it was a lot because I remember it. And I said, "Do you think it's 2 hours?" She said, "No, it's more like 8." And that's, so it was a little odd, actually, a little obsessive. I think when I was a teenager, and maybe, when I was going to school, school kid, coming from where I came from, it seemed absurd that anyone could make a living at music. So I just sort of kept my mouth shut about that. I didn't tell anybody I'm going to be a musician. I just proceeded with it. Because it didn't seem like, no parent wants their kid to go out and starve or and end up on end up on drugs with long hair and leather pants in an alley somewhere. So, yeah, so I don't really know. I feel like I was just always been a musician. That said, my parents were very supportive of it as a hobby and something that made me happy. I just didn't really bring up the I'm going to be a musician when I grow up stuff after a while.
Right. So then your sort of first big break then was with Ben Folds 5.
Yeah, that's right. Because I've been waiting tables and doing all kinds of other stuff before then. In my mind, I was old by the time that band broke. I was like 28 years old and felt like, I'd wasted a decade carrying those songs around, which it wasn't their time. It wasn't my song's time. I carried those around for 10 years, and it was sort of the vibe of music was very much still rooted in the 80s. And it wasn't until, Nirvana and indie rock broke through into the mainstream that people would consider, rougher, newer ideas. And that's when we broke through very quickly. Like it seemed almost effortless at the point that the door was open, and that was the mid 90s.
So you say that, and when I read your book, that is how it seemed. But then yet, there was a decade of just you working and playing in different, clubs and places. And I think a lot of people from the outside looking in always think it was just some overnight success. And there really is not a real overnight success, right? Even though when it finally broke, that's what it felt like.
Time is just time. It just requires time and day upon day upon day to accomplish anything. Sometimes things are just gestating. I could have just thought properly about it for 10 years. I was beating my head against a wall. It wasn't time for my music, so I was just honing my craft and my mental, how prepared I was, for instance, by the time Ben Folds 5 was getting attention from major labels and from labels, they would ask for a demo. Well, my mindset after 10 years of beating my head against the wall was, I don't make demos. I don't make a business card for you guys. You can buy it. It's for sale. I make music. I don't make demos. And that attitude took 10 years to earn. But that attitude was really important because as you proceed, navigate the incredibly busy highway of the music business or life in general, you have to pick a lane. You can't say, "Oh man, I'll do anything." Or, "You want me to do that?" "Yeah, that's cool." You can't do that, or that's my experience. And so, like, sometimes I think that time that it takes to do something is actually both gestating with ideas and also preparing your mind for who you are when you step into a myriad of just, different situations that you'll almost be tested in. Like we went out after 10 years of sort of thinking about it. I suppose I just decided that it was an acoustic piano or nothing. I play acoustic piano. I don't play that ironing board thing. It's not an instrument. Yes, I was broke and couldn't afford that, but I figured out a way. And so that became really important because we're playing, essentially punk rock clubs, and we're squatting a baby grand piano, which would seem impossible, into the middle of the stage and playing these clubs. And I don't think that was a small thing. And that took 10 years for me to realize and to figure out how to do. And, those things just take time. It takes a certain number of breaths and sleeps and calories to get to a place.
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of the most fascinating parts of your book for me anyway, was reading about you kind of dragging that piano along. And I was a percussionist for many, many years. And I just think about, and I think about dragging my drum kit along, and I'm just like, man, I can't imagine dragging a big ass piano like that around. That's just incredible.
But, it is the same thing, because as soon as you get, like if you live in New York City, or it used to be this way, they'd say, no one schleps their drum set to rehearsal. They have a system where you just play whatever shitty drums are sitting there, and they're not precious about it, But as soon as one of them might think, oh, my style is really also rooted in my kit and the way I tune it, and I think I'll figure this out. It may seem ludicrous at the moment, but you figure out a way to move it. And the same was with the piano. I was like, okay, there's a big hunk of like 3/4 ton instrument. How can that get on the stage? Because it's possible. I can imagine it on the stage. How can it get there? And through step, you're like, okay, well, it goes on its side. Okay, well, I'll talk to piano movers and see how they do that. What equipment do we need? What ramps do we need? Then pretty soon we figured it out, and we just did it. And it's just step at a time. I found that bands had a harder time moving a B3 Hammond organ or a Yamaha CP70 electric acoustic piano. That was more difficult than it was for us to move the piano. We had a system and we figured it out, So yeah, it seems crazy, but it's once you decide to do it, it's not crazy.
Then it's not crazy. No. You're just going to do it. You make it work.
You do it.
Absolutely. So one of the questions that I know a lot of young artists struggle with, and I think it would be good for them to just hear your take on it, is, you've got this artistic ability, and then you finally make it, and then there's this whole world of business in being an artist. And how do you navigate that artistic side of your creativity with that of this is now a business, like for real? And so any light you'd like to shed on that for any of our young artists kind of starting to deal with that?
Well, let's see. How could I organize that in a snack bite sort of vibe here? I think, first of all, respect the business as its own art form, as creative and as being part of what you do, an extension of what you do. Like Cartier-Bresson, the photographer, called his Leica his right arm, part of his right arm, Like it is part of your right arm. Like that's what your tools are. So respect it for that. But also remember that as much respect as you're going to give it, and you're going to make it its own art form, its place is to sell your ideas. We're not going to wag the dog with your business. And I think that those who go down that path do so at their artistic peril. You do what you do. There almost anybody with a reasonable idea who is being themselves, who has put together what they do with enough skill to actually make it so. So if I have an idea and it's a song, or I'm making, puppets or signs or whatever it is I'm doing, if I'm doing that with enough skill to express what I'm really seeing, what I'm really feeling, there are more people on planet Earth to buy that than you could shake a stick at. You don't have to hit, even in the US, you don't have to hit 0.0000.1% of the population to make a living at what you do. Okay, so what I'm saying is that if you change your vision of it to suit a business that is basically at this point failing to get your word out there, you're screwing your business altogether. The business is there to find the people who agree with you. There are more of them than you can count. The failure of the business is so often, or what the business has to catch up to, is finding those people. And the reason I think it's an important point, and it may be subtle, is that it's really tempting as you build your artistic business to change anything about what you do to suit what you perceive is your demographic. That's treacherous. You have to do exactly what you do. Your business's job is to find those people. So get to work at that when you approach your business. I need to find those people. But first of all, if you don't have something that is you, that is honest and skillfully crafted, that is expressing you, if you don't have that in its most honest, competent form, your business will never create people out of thin air. And I think that it's so easy to do the opposite, to go, oh man, I'm almost reaching these people if I would just tweak this thing. Now, that's not to say that you don't accept feedback and that you don't adjust these things through feedback, but it's the point that it changes what you are doing, which is so easy to do.
Right. But I mean, like, I just think some people are lost in, they suddenly have, I mean, a real good example today, people can go put a song up on, a few songs up on YouTube, and the next thing you know, they've got a million people are like actually listening to this song, and then they decide, okay, how do they navigate finding the right people versus, and it's even the case in business of finding the right marketers, finding the right people who honestly know how to do ads on Facebook and everything else. But how do they find the people that are going to help them in that journey?
Well,
Because now,
I don't know.
Yeah, it used to be you kind of, that was part of it. Like, you know, and now it's all of a sudden people are kind of making their own path. And then suddenly it's like, oh, this is for real. I got to figure it out. I think we're seeing more of that today.
Yeah. Well, but see, you could take a lot of different signals from your success on one thing. You can take the signal that people like that one thing, so I'm going to make more of that one thing. Well, it's very possible that one thing was either an outlier of what you do, or the reason that was working was because of its naivety, or because of its purity, or because it was the first time you had done that. My band had our first hit on a ballad. It was like the first serious ballad we actually did. So what are we supposed to learn from that? Do all ballads, or to do something new each time? You know, so the signal of the business can't come back. You can't read your raw data the wrong way. You know,
correct.
You can't have that coming back and say 1 million people listened to this, therefore, and I smiled in my video, so I'm going to smile all the time. You know, and the next thing you do, you don't think is happy, so you don't want to smile, but you're smiling through it. You know, like you can't. I guess that's what I'm saying, is that your business can't wag, and you're thrown in the deep end. And when you get a lot of attention suddenly, you know, all I can say is we don't seem to be living through an era where there are systems that will take care of you while you develop and get a little less soft in the center. Because, you know, if you get 1 million hits out of nowhere on a YouTube video, you may be soft in the center, like artistically. You may not have your sea legs or whatever. And as I say, the 10 years that I took, I didn't want to take these 10 years. It was very frustrating, but I became baked enough in the center to be unshakable. I wasn't movable. No one was going to wag me. It just wasn't going to happen, because I had already experienced career death or career stillbirth for a decade. What are you going to do? Cancel me? Like I've already done this for 10 years. So so I wasn't concerned anymore. And I don't think you would have that kind of tough just to step into the internet and have 1 million people. I mean, I think you and I would be really ill-equipped to tell someone who's young and has a great idea what to do with that 1 million viewers. Except I think we probably would both agree you really need to remain yourself. And that's a
Yes.
very, very murky endeavor. That's really tough because it's, yeah, but this is what anyone has to do. The thing is they don't have someone now to go, my label. I was on a Columbia, Sony now label.
Hmm.
We could fail. That's fine. Bruce Springsteen had us. Michael Jackson had our back. All these people on the label, Celine Dion was on our very small label. They were selling records. If we sucked wind instead of gasoline for 2 records, there was money there to make it work. And the label knew that long term, if they kept watering my career, that it would grow. No one's doing that for you right now, I don't think.
I don't think so either.
And
Exactly.
so they have to watch your podcast and my podcast if they want some advice from the old
That's
people,
right.
and hopefully we
right.
give them good advice, and I don't know. I just think be yourself.
Yeah.
That would be pretty unimpeachable.
Couple quick questions. Just one of your favorite events that you've ever done.
Oh, what do you mean favorite events? Like
where you played. Like what was one of your favorite venues?
Well, a lot of the things that are landmark moments, I think maybe I built them up in my head and they ended up being a disappointment. But then in retrospect, I'm so glad I did them again. So it's kind of back to stuff you tell your grandchildren one day. I love all the things that I've been able to tick off just because I know I did them. If it's Royal Albert Hall or if it's performances or things I've done with the Kennedy Center, those are just like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I did that. Like tell that to the version of me in band camp or something. Like I'd be excited about that. In the present tense, it's always these places that would seem uneventful where something transcendental happens, or it could be Lawrence, Kansas, and just can do no wrong that night, and something seems really right, and I can't explain it. Other people who saw the show might say it wasn't that good. I don't know, but so I don't know. I mean, I'm just glad I can tick off some of the famous stuff. I've really kind of dig that I did it, and I cherish that, and put a little feather in my cap.
There you go. So one of the things, like in asking people, like, oh yeah, I'm doing Ben Folds, and so it's funny because with the sort of engineer type people, they're like, oh yeah, he was really instrumental in saving the recording studio in Nashville, and that is how you're known through that group of people and extremely admired. Do you want to share a little bit about that? Because I think that's pretty awesome too.
Yeah, that was one of those things that I think like anything, I like improvisation and I like taking things as they come. And that came out of the blue. I mean, I ended up with a studio, which was just because I was walking along in Nashville, not even living there, just on tour, and saw a sign outside of the famous RCA Studio. And it was so understated. It was like studio space for lease, and the lawn was grown up, and it looked like it almost looked abandoned. And I walked straight in. It wasn't even locked. The wind blowing through the place, wires were pulled out of the floor. And this was in about 2002. And, I talked to this woman who was standing in the room, I guess kind of ran the place. And I said, I'd be interested in renting it. And she basically laughed me out of the room. Like, you don't want to do that. And we need someone that can afford this and this. And I guess maybe I just didn't look that presentable that day. I'm not sure why she got the impression that I wasn't serious. But she called me back after, I guess, there was Google or Yahoo or something at that point. I think she worked out that I did things. The idea was for me just to rent it. Sorry, it's a long story, but the idea was for me to rent it for a few months. I ended up in there for 15 years. And the thing is the studio owners always had it in mind to sell the place to let them build condos. And so having someone in there that was dumb enough to run a studio and to be run out at the drop of a hat, they would take your lease money because that's fine. But at some point, we're going to build this up. Now, a serious studio owner would not have moved into that place because they would have thought, I'm going to move my equipment in and then have it decommissioned suddenly and all my business goes out the window. So this is a little complicated, but after 15 years, suddenly real estate prices in Nashville hit that point, and there was that moment where they sold the place to a developer to mow it down. And I had for years, my management and I had for years been trying to avoid that by finding deals for them, people to purchase the place. I called famous people I knew who could just buy it out of their back pocket. And we had situations for them. But they took this one weird mow it down offer for some reason. And
Wow.
I was emotionally, I think I was a little upset because we had options for them that would save the studio and they didn't listen. And secondly, a piece of music history was going to be gone. And thirdly, that had become my home. And even though I was renting it, so I didn't like this on any level. And I basically put down everything I was doing at that moment. And we just went to town to try to make sure that this stood. I started looking around Music Row and realizing all of these old places were being leveled and they were putting up condos. The thing is, and this is, I think, the greatest breakthrough of our case, where eventually we found an investor, we did the PR that was necessary, we got they're awesome, and I worked with them nonstop for a couple of years, and they're in DC, and they're a historical trust for important buildings.
Mm-hmm.
God, this is a long story, but that's the way life is. they're long things, right? They're not simple. I mean, it's not like I just went out to be a warrior for studios. But what we realized was that there are amazing places to hang on to for the better of the community, for history's sake, that we need to have, that aren't great pieces of architecture.
Right.
And that was the catch. Our building, like I said, I walked up to it, it's a cinder block thing. It's really unassuming. Why not mow that down? It's going to fall down anyway. Like there's nothing impressive. Music Row is just like all these old homes. Well, in that old home that's about to fall down, Hank Williams recorded 3 of his hits. Dolly Parton recorded Across the Street. Like it's American music history. You can walk into those spaces and feel it. We're building it. It's just not in impressive spaces. So this historical trust saved the building as well by putting an overlay on it, which was a great political, legal win for it.
Mm-hmm.
And they established sort of a precedent that a place does not have to be an architectural work of art. It's what happened in the space, and it was the people's ideas in that space and how that inspires art and history and the community around there forward. And I think that was significant, and I'm proud of that.
Oh, that's very significant. And that is such a really, I was reading about it, but that piece of it I did not pick up in all of it. And is that it wasn't about the building. Like, you have homes in different sites that are architecturally, they're like, okay, that is, this is a time that we want to save. But this was what happened in the space. Yeah. Which is just so cool.
Well, it's more about a place growing up and getting their independence. We thought about, still after 400 years, we're thinking like Europe a little more, like let's save this castle. Let's save these, because that was from their golden era, where our golden era has like wood paneling. Like it's right. we're different. Like that's us. And so a studio that kind of smells like linoleum, you know what? important stuff happened there. Let's keep the linoleum and let's keep that place up because we made country music. And I'm not a huge
Yeah.
country music fan, but this is important history. So it also kind of saving that studio put up a little bit of a firewall for other studios in Nashville. And I say a little bit because we just couldn't put the effort into saving the rest. They kept knocking them down, but I think
Oh,
it did slow the advance a little bit.
oh, that's great. So this is kind of our signature question of the show. So what does working from your happy place mean to you?
Working from my happy place. I think when I'm working from my happy place, all sense of time goes away, and that's how I know it. I don't know what time it is. I don't know how many hours have passed or how many hours it will take to do something. All of that warps and kind of goes, and I'm just floating in what I'm doing, even if I'm frustrated with it and think I'm not, quite finding it or don't feel like what I'm working on is adequate. I know that I'm in it. When I'm not working from my happy place, I know that 10 minutes have passed, 10 seconds have passed. I'm aware of time. But when I stop being aware of time, I think I'm where I should be.
Which is pretty much in your zone of creativity. Wouldn't you say that that's probably accurate?
It is. It's in that zone of being interested, inspired, even frustrated because it sucks sometimes,
Mhm.
and it can feel like intense work. But yeah, it's the timeless, the time stand still feeling.
Any other advice? So this is more from the artistic point of view, not the business side of it, but any advice that you'd like to give to budding artists, people that just really think they might have something, unsure, wanting to follow this path of music? What kind of advice would you have for them?
Well, you have something, and it's really important to scrap with everything you've got to make sure that something is not just in your head, but has been made into something that can be shared. Otherwise, you can have ideas and they can be very, very unique and not fully formed, and they can make you happy. They can just stay in your head. But if you're going out into the world with your ideas, you have to bridge that gap between what you think it is and actually making it that. You don't want to have to explain the joke to anybody. It takes a lifetime to craft something that needs no explanation at all, that just simply is. And so I think that my advice would be, don't take any of that for granted. The struggle to remain yourself is real, and that is the most important thing. And there will be many factors that will try to convince you that being yourself isn't working. That's the only thing that is certainly working. The rest of it may not be firing on all cylinders. And so you don't blame yourself for these things. You have an idea that inspires you, cling to that like a pit bull. Do not let go of that. There is nothing there. There's nothing good about changing who you are. That doesn't mean that you don't take feedback, because you might say, tennis ball in your mind. And then what people heard you said was, orange. That's weird, but we've lost it in translation somewhere. I need to work harder translating. I don't need to work harder changing my idea.
Right.
Don't change the essence of what you do. Seriously, you'll have doubts about it. I always have had, but there is nothing to be gained from changing who you are or changing the essence of what interests you, what inspires you. And almost always, if it's an idea worth anything, it's a little controversial, a little weird, doesn't fit in with everything else. It's not going to get you cool points. Fuck all that. All you have to do is double down on you, but question your craft and question the delivery system, all that stuff, and keep making it good. Musicians that think they don't need theory, that think they don't need technique and all that stuff, I don't agree with you. I think you need to scrap with everything you have. And I think that all that promotion stuff, my experience is that when people have success in selling their music, that there's almost always, no one knows how it happened. No one ever knows how that happened. And so you look at, like, you'll say, oh, that producer has had success with this thing, I'm going to go with them. You'll work with that producer and it'll sound nothing like you thought it should sound like. And you'll go to the genius behind the marketing. And what did you do? What's the genius behind this marketing? Honestly, they don't know. They don't know any of that shit. What happened was a really great thing was realized that couldn't be stopped. And that's what you need to work on making. You would be far better off going back to the drawing board and making another great thing, remain yourself, stick really true by who you are. Life is way too short to wag the dog and become the person who's trying to retrofit an idea to what other people like. This is not a certain world. You might be very lucky to have a little success on one thing. Great. I'm not saying don't try, but don't bastardize and screw what you do to fit that stuff. And that's not a matter of having integrity. That's about you being happy and living a happy, creative life. You'll be a lot happier if you do that, I think. I always have been.
Wow. Well, that was great. Thank you so much for that. Wow.
Hopefully, well, he talks a lot. I just want the kids to understand.
I know. It is so true. Like what you would go back today and tell yourself when you're 18. You know what I mean? It's just kind of funny.
Well, I just feel like kids these days have oddly been softened way more than I was. I was beat into shape a little harder. It was a little rougher, but I went into a really soft world. I went into a world where I knew I was going to do better than my father, where there was relative peace, where in a world where world hunger went down, world disease, down. Everything about the era that I lived through was so cushy when you look at like humankind all together. And I kind of like went through we're going to beat you into, so I just came out and was like, yeah, I've trained for the Olympics at 12,000 feet and I'm ready to go. Kids now have been like coddled in their soft space. And now they're going into something that I can barely deal with. Like they're going into a really tough world and I feel bad for them. And one of the things I think is really tough is that they feel there are all these rules. Yeah. They feel like there's jokes you can't make, things you can't say, things that are the right answer if you're like recording your stuff. Like I see YouTube tutorials on production and things, and there's a right and a wrong answer to everything. Has been gone from black straight to white with no grays in the middle. And if you look at the result of the kind of art you have to make when you come in, and this isn't a comment on cancel culture. And all that kind of stuff. I don't care about that. Of course, if you don't like something, cancel the fuck out of it. I don't give a shit. But it's more about the artistic place of not being able to, not feeling you can express yourself because there's a right and wrong answer about everything you do. And you've been softened to a point where you can't deal with the controversy. So you jump from one side to the other. I feel bad for the kids doing that in this era. And I think that the what you need to cling to is your vision and what you feel and what you want to say. If you don't do that, if you let that get stuffed back into your mouth like a tennis ball, like you're the Gimp in Pulp Fiction, you're not making yourself happy. You're not going to make anybody else happy. And I don't think anyone has ever gone to hell for being honest and being themselves. So that's what you need to do.
Yep. So in closing, any
don't ask me anything else. I'll talk more. Haven't you learned?
I loved this. Loved it. So any new things? We got your podcast they can check out. That is Lightning Bugs.
Yeah.
And yeah, anything else? I know you're doing this live stream thing in Australia coming up. So anything you want our listeners to know about?
I'm going to be touring. I do my thing. You put my name in the search and you find out things I'm doing, and it's always something different. So when you get that bored at night, one time you're sitting on the toilet, put in Ben Folds and see what's happening.
There you go. Well, Ben, thank you so much for taking the time to just share your journey, your wisdom, your insights, and advice, especially for young artists today. That's what I'm always. That's where my heart's really got a special place, and I know you do too. So thank you so much.
All right. Good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. To all
Cheers.
our listeners out there, thanks so much for joining us on Work From Your Happy Place. Don't forget to rate and review us. We so appreciate it. And the best form of compliment that we can get is to share us with a friend. Thanks so much, and we will see you next time on Work From Your Happy Place.
Thanks for joining us at Work From Your Happy Place. If you like what you hear, please share it with your friends. And be sure to rate and review us on iTunes or Stitcher. For a free gift on finding your own happy place, please visit workfromyourhappyplace.com and click on the free audio button. Thanks again for listening.